The big Saturday here on RaceSpotTV continues as following the iRacing Thrustmaster Rallycross World Championship Series, we bring you RaceSpot's second big show of the day with the Pro Mazda Championship here at Circuit de Barcelona, Catalunya, known shortly by most as either Catalunya, Barcelona, or even just flatly as Spain. It's going to be Randy Cheneth and Nolan Rempel bringing you the action for this one. Qualifying is currently underway, and we'll bring that up on your side panel. But Nolan, it's a bit of a three broadcast streak we have here to end this season with the championship for Pro Mazdas and covering their races. And well, this is going to be, I think, the most interesting of the three. We had Zandvoort last week, Spain today, and then Phillip Island next week. This being a whole new track, it's going to be the first time we see these cars around the iconic F1 circuit here in Spain.
It absolutely will. So the first time we're seeing the Pro Mazdas coming around this beautiful circuit here in Spain, and it's bound to be quite the interesting one. Of course, draft will be playing in quite heavily off of the final corner down to turn number one, and of course in the other DRS zone down the Formula One track. Of course, Pro Mazdas with just 240 horsepower, not holding any DRS today, as we see Andrea Cini making his way up into second place on the front row. Still, we are still waiting to see if anybody can really top Angus Waddell at the top of the boards here today in qualifying.
Yep, still that fast lap at a 1 minute 38.399. As we take a look at this driver of Scott McIntyre out there on the racetrack, he's gone to a 138.740. That sits fourth overall. Let's take a look, of course, at our track details. And, well, apparently we don't have the track layout yet into our overlay software, but apologies. But just need to know what you need to know. We are running the full Formula One layout here tonight, Nolan. So it's going to be a big, long lap for these guys. 26-lap race. We're expecting a pit stop based on what we saw in Brazil a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so, seeing a pit stops in the Pro Mazda Championship, a little bit unusual to say the very least, as qualifying finishes up 25 laps here today at Spain, with that pit stop being expected around this Formula One layout. Long track for these cars. This is all bound to be a very interesting one, to say the very least.
Let's go down your starting grid. We have 18 cars doing battle today, and well, no one mentioned him. Angus Waddell, quick time at a 138.399. He will take pole position along with Andre Cini. Ollie Peacock will make up the inside of the second row with Scott McIntyre lining up alongside him. And Medema will round out your top five with Jens Windler rounding out sixth for that third row. Pascal Filotto in seventh, Erwin Vandenberg eighth. Fabio Berchtold and Donald Poole, they make up row 5 in position 9 and 10 with Gabriel Perez and John Michael Noyon on row number 6. John Young, Troy Needlinger on row 7. Carlos Medina, row number 8, with Paul Noper and Dave Candy rounding out the 18-car field that'll be doing battle around here. And Nolan, the talking points for the start of this, it's a pretty long run for these guys, maybe the longest run they have, going down in towards turn 1 from where they currently sit on the starting grid. So it's going to be a long trip into the hard braking zone. And of course, that first braking zone is a lot of racing, a lot of side-by-side racing you can do through that first sector. Turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and then of course up to turn 4, where we saw several years ago the host of Team Mercedes come to an end, both with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. Hopefully no one's races ends similarly to that.
Well, with the long run down towards turn number 1, it would not surprise me if we were to be seeing the draft playing in quite heavily, even in the first run down to the starting road, into the turn 1. Expect to see maybe some 3-wide action. These cars are small enough. We could even be seeing some potential 4-wide action. Not advised, but certainly an option to say at the very least, as the lights are out and we're racing in Spain.
Green light is up, and we are racing here for 25 laps. Not a great start here from your pole sitter as they stream down into turn 1 for the first time. The number 4 of Ollie Peacock is going to have the race lead. It's hard into the braking zone for the first time. 3 wide for the point around the outside. It's going to be the number 2 of Scott McIntyre. So already we've had 3 different leaders, and we're not even through the first 3 corners of this race. Off of turn 3, screaming up towards turn 4. This difficult uphill right-hander. They're nearly going to fan out 3 wide again. again as they just about get to the top of the hill, but they'll stay single file. The 2 holds on to that race lead for the moment, but up the inside, the 4 of Ollie Peacock. He wants it around the outside now towards turn 5, but McIntyre will hold strong. Nolan, we are swapping positions back and forth already up here at the head of the field.
Scott McIntyre desperately trying to fend off Oil Peacock as he tries to hang on to that lead. Started down in 4th place, second row, got the lead around the outside. Turn number 1 got a huge bite of oversteer, nearly lost that lead. He's already pulling a big gap as they enter what would be a DRS zone if these were Formula 1 cars. Of course, these are not Formula 1 cars. Battle for second on behind them. Andrea Cini trying to go around the outside, down into the hairpin, but Peacock is going to be able to keep that spot, and now Cini is on the defensive against Angus Waddell, your pole sitter, down in the 4th.
Up to turn 12, your race leaders are going to go, and towards turn 13, Europe cars. This, of course, so much shortcuts, the old layout that was so fast, and in towards the chicane here to end the lap before you come on towards turn 16 and down the long front straightaway, and this is where we're going to see that slipstream really play into an effect. Right on board here with the 3rd car in line, Andre Cini, as he tries to reel in the likes of Scott McIntyre and Ollie Peacock in front of him. This is where you're likely going to see a bunch of slipstreaming down this front straightaway, but as you can see, Scott McIntyre able to open up a gap here, Nolan, here early, and one of the big talking points I think about this racetrack is how do you set up your Pro Mazda to get around here, because it's relatively high speed compared to some of the circuits we're used to seeing in these cars. Notably, you think back to last week when we ran Zandvoort, these guys probably are going to have their cars relatively trimmed out to be quick down that front straightaway. But man, oh man, trying to run a trimmed out car around here for the number of
crash.
What do we got?
We have got Jens Windayer that went around over in turn number 4 and collected Andrea Medina to completely chop the back of the car off replay up on your screen now as he is now down into 17th place. And here is Wendeller coming around turn number 4 down into the braking zone for turn, well, this is going to be turn 4 he's coming into now, and loses the back end in the middle of the corner, comes around and clips that other car as it went through.
Unfortunately there for Jens Windler, that's going to be the end of his motor race. So we move back over to live pictures, and you can see Scott McIntyre here, Nolan, able to open up an early margin. This is important. We talked about the slipstream. Being able to break the draft early, I think, is going to be really important for Mr. Scott McIntyre. Ollie Peacock not nearly close enough, but we're coming to the end of the second lap, and your top 4 run in inverse order from where they started on the grid. 4th place starting Scott McIntyre is leads. 3rd place starting Ollie Peacock is 2nd. 2nd place starting Andre Cini was 3rd, and the pole sitter Angus Waddell was 4th. Those two just changed hands, but your top 4 basically in inverse order, as you see side by side down the front straightaway once again, and well, up there, up the inside, fighting for that race lead. The 2 of McIntyre will hold on.
McIntyre continuing to hold on to that lead. He's really defended that position well as you see both Peacock and Waddell running a little wider. Battle is on further down in the field, though, as well as once again McIntyre goes on the defensive, runs a little wide off at the corner, so he is going to try to hang on to that position, and if he can keep defending the way it is, he could lead a good number of laps here before he eventually falls victim to that draft from Ollie Peacock.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. As these guys work themselves back down through this tight left-hander, through immediately a little bit of a right-hand flick that they have to deal with at 7 and 8 through turn 9. Then the short shoot from turn 9 to turn 10. Lacaxia, the difficult hairpin that's sort of deceivingly tight, I should say. So up into the braking zone through this left-hand corner, and then up now, turn 11, turn 12. This very, very tight sort of middle sector of the lap. We'll shift the cameras a little bit rearward. You see the 10 of Fabio Berchtold there in the mix. He currently runs P6. He's up 3 spots. Gabriel Perez, great start for him here. Nolan started 11th. He runs 7th.
So Perez on a very good run, trying to make that up into 6th place, and he could get to it as he nearly runs to the back of him down into the final chicane. And that's going to cause them to lose out on quite a bit of exit momentum coming down onto the front straightaway. Of course, still does have that draft as we ride on board with Perez, bottom of the screen, only hitting 130 miles an hour, but quickly climbing now at 140. That's not going to be enough, though, to get him that run he needs down to turn number 1. He's going to have to wait a little while longer before he can make that move into 6th.
147 is what we saw Gabriel Perez top out there down the front straightaway, so you know that these cars doing really not close to anywhere the high speeds that if you're a open wheel racing fan, especially of road stuff, that's not the sort of speeds you're used to seeing cars do here. F1 cars probably thereabouts peaking 200 miles an hour. So we'll shift over back to your leading group, and these top four, Nolan, have really kind of started playing nice with one another compared to what we saw at the start of this motor race. You know, the first couple corners we saw 3 or 4 different lead changes through 3 or 4 different corners. Now we're about midway through lap number 4. We're not seeing that race lead cycle out nearly as consistently. Matter of fact, Scott McIntyre has pretty much held it since the opening lap here in that opening salvo. But I have a feeling there's a little bit of a strategy working at play. Like we said, we're expecting a pit stop. 26 laps is what we did at Interlagos, and they had to come down pit road. You're taking 1 lap out of that, but this is a longer circuit, I feel, than Interlagos, and I think it's a track you probably burn a lot more fuel at as well.
I would have to agree with you there. You're flat out a lot more often at this track, especially in these lightweight Pro Mazdas. So the fuel could definitely come into play big here, especially at the end. If they do come down, it's not going to be for very long. They're not even going to be changing tires, I would expect. Just a quick splash dash and away we go. But if McIntyre is running out front, he is burning the most fuel out of these guys. Drivers like Ollie Peacock behind him as he continues to try to close in that gap. They're actually burning less fuel because they're getting the assistance from that slipstream. So, do you think we could maybe even see some swap draft around? Drivers maybe trying to help each other out and maybe conserve their fuel a little bit more?
Definitely something that could potentially become a factor. Scott McIntyre up towards turn 4 is going to hold on to that race lead. We're talking about the comparisons to Interlagos. This racetrack is a quarter of a mile longer, so it's not a ton longer, Nolan. It's actually a lot more similar than I would have guessed, but the way this track sort of does things, Interlagos really has a lot of long straightaways. You have a long front straightaway, then immediately after turn 3 you have a long straightaway, and then it's high speed as well, up towards the likes of turn 6, turn 7. Here you have the front straightaway is quite long, but you don't really have a second long straightaway, and I think that's why this track feels so much longer when in reality it really isn't that much longer. But because of all that, that is also going to drive up your fuel consumption as well.
Certainly will, so we'll have to keep an eye on to see how things develop on that front as Fabio Berchtold locking up a little bit down into that hairpin. So something you also got to watch as well is those lockups into the harder braking zones like at La Caixa. So it is another issue they need to look out for, especially going into the faster corners, of course, with the Pro Mazdas. So easy to lock the brakes up as it is with most other Formula cars, and it is something they really have to seriously watch out for. We already have one car ducking down to the pit road early. It is Pascal Filato coming down into the lane.
So this is going to give us an idea on the Delta time, and we're not expecting 2 sets of pit stops, but this is definitely an early one, and I'm kind of hit or miss on this at the moment. We'll have to see what the pit lane Delta time is here for Pascal Filato. It doesn't look like there's any intention of that car to get jacked up. No surprise there. 6, 7, 8, 8.6 was the box time there for Pascal Filato as he rolls down pit road, and you see a pit road Delta time as 27.7. Of course, he's still getting up to speed down this front straightaway, so you're likely going to see that Delta, I think, closer to 30 seconds if you actually account for the time loss all the way down to that blue cone, Norm.
I agree with you on that one. Of course, very, very long run down to the front straightaway, even after you exit the pits. As for third, about to get underway here, Angus Waddell making his way up into that final podium position, makes the decisive maneuver underneath Andrea Cini off of Kampsa. Now, there is a question as to how useful that pit stop might work out, because yes, he's out of traffic, he's in clean air. He also, though, will not have the help from the draft of any other cars to help him, so he will have to be doing all his fuel consumption on his own. Doesn't have anybody to help him out in that anymore.
Yeah, the big thing here for him is if he was losing time in traffic, it makes sense. If he feels he was losing time, but if that's not the case, coming down early definitely doesn't seem like it could be that much of a factor as these guys work their way back down the front straightaway inside of 20 laps to go in this motor race. I don't think there's any chance that we see people going for a 2-stopper here today, so I wouldn't even think about that whatsoever as Angus Waddell is going to hold on to that second spot. I will say I'm a little bit surprised, Nolan. I don't know if maybe it's people prioritizing the fuel save, the likes of Ollie Peacock, especially in P2. we'll do a ride-along next trip around the racetrack. But we haven't seen any big moves since that opening lap in towards turn 1. I'm surprised the slipstream down that front straightaway hasn't been more effective.
I'm a little bit surprised on that too, to be honest with you, but in terms of Peacock, it actually does make sense, because if you look closely, you'll see on the right front of that front wing, it is actually bent up a little bit, so he must have made some kind of contact somewhere, and there you see it on board. There you see it very clearly, really bent in, so that could be affecting that slipstream all that little bit more. These cars are very reliant on aerodynamics on the longer straights to kind of help them make momentum, so every little bit helps, and that could be causing him some serious damage in terms of his overall speed. Runs wide, takes out a few cones.
Yeah, running a little bit wide there, as you can see, as they work their way back down in towards this tight left-hand hairpin. He's trying to track out, and you see there Waddell, I believe that's who that is. Yeah, Angus Waddell, all over the back of him here, Nolan. So maybe I think recently getting that damage here with the 4 car somehow, some way, and we're going to have a fight, I think, on our hands for P2 here in just a moment.
I think what might have happened was we saw earlier on in the race a huge lunge down into the chicane, maybe a little bit of netco contact. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen that, certainly won't be the last, but that would be very unfortunate if that was how that damage was collected. Waddell, though, he is going to have a huge toe staying at the draft. He is going to make the lookout down side by side into turn number 1. It will be Waddell way later on the brakes. Peacock gives that one up without much of a fight. So as Ollie Peacock continues to try to work his way around, now on the defense against Andrea Cini. This time he is going to go big on the defense. Cini trying to arc it over and under to get that run on the exit. Going to try to go for it, going to go back up the inside into turn number 5, but does not have the speed. Bows out of that one. He's going to have to wait just a little bit longer.
Now we're going to watch your pole sitter work of Ollie Peacock. Got himself the pole position, like we said, immediately at the start of the race. His start was horrible. No other way to say it. Immediately dropped down to P4, sat there for a couple laps, and he sat there eventually getting himself up to 3rd and now 2nd. Excuse me, Angus Waddell, not Ollie Peacock, who had the pole position. We're just kind of keeping an eye on that fight for 3rd and 4th as well. Close lunge there from Andre Cini, but nothing's going to go just yet as we continue to track Angus Waddell trying to reel in that leading car of Scott McIntyre. Will bring up the onboard lap gaps. 0.683 is the delta between 1st and 2nd at the moment. Angus Waddell is absolutely flying out there in that number 1 car through the chicane, and we might just have our first chance to see this slipstream really work as they come down the front straightaway. But no, Scott McIntyre is going to pit.
Scott McIntyre down to the pit road. I did not expect that one at all, so that came right out of left field for me, and I'm pretty sure that might have come out of left field for you too. So he's going to come down to the pits. This will be interesting to see how this pit stop will work out for him. Where will he come out? That's going to be crucial for him. He might come out right in front of traffic. We do have cars, as far back as 35 seconds or down to 1 minute and 9 seconds even. So he's only in there for 8.4 seconds. That is shorter than the pit stop we saw earlier today. Not by much, but just a little bit. Going to be coming back out, but it doesn't look like he's going to have any traffic to help him out here.
He's going to have traffic ahead of him, actually. It's going to be Troy Needlinger he has out in front of him. We'll latch on to sort of a rearward-facing camera, and you can see that was your at one point just a couple of moments ago leading driver. We'll kind of shift forward, and after that, there's not much traffic. So I'd say if he's timed this well, Scott McIntyre here, Nolan, this might work out. If he can sort of get to the point where he just catches Troy, gets that slipstream, and doesn't get held up by Troy too much, this could work out quite nicely, I think, for Mr. McIntyre. But if he gets held up behind Troy for very long, I don't think this is going to be exactly what Scott McIntyre was looking for. That said, of course, all his competition now, Angus Waddell isn't going to have a slipstream at all, and Ollie Peacock and Andre Cini are racing with one another. Matter of fact, those positions have just changed hands. Andre Cini is up into P2.
They changed positions, and they almost changed positions down to P4 as well, as Peacock's going to come down to the pit lane now for his one stop. But that almost turned into disaster on that back straightaway, because off of the corner, Peacock was all over the shot trying to fend off against Andrea Cini. Didn't manage to hold him off. Cini did get the lunge down into the hairpin and managed to sort himself out. So As Peacock comes down into the lane. Here's the big question. Will he come out by Scott McIntyre, who is on the front straightaway and now past Troy Needlinger? He's in the pit stop for a long time, though. 12 seconds, 13 seconds. It looks like he's fixing the damage. Yeah.
Question is, how important is that going to be? That hasn't updated graphically yet, but that's the only reason he'd be in there for 17 seconds that I can think of is Ollie Peacock, as he is going to come out in traffic. You see the 17 car on the outside. That's Carlos Medina. He's going to have to navigate around, and then there was another car. It was Erwin Vandenberg. You can see he's just ahead of, but unless these guys are somehow having to make another round of pit stops here, Nolan, and he somehow find a way to cut one, I don't see any way that that's going to work out in favor of Peacock.
I agree. So Peacock might have just shot himself in the foot right there, to put it bluntly, as he continues to try to cycle his way back through the traffic. The front wing damage still hasn't adjusted. Maybe he didn't fix it all the way. Maybe he realized he was losing too much time, got back out as he could, because I don't... Correct me if I'm wrong, and I probably am wrong on this, but I don't think these Pro Mazdas have the simple, front wing change. We can just do it in 10 seconds and be done with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I'm sure it's not a difficult thing to do for these cars. I'm sure it's something that's been developed into them and engineered into them. But it's not just how the car is designed. One of the things that's actually really interesting about the iRacing sim is they sort of emulate kind of lower skilled pit crews in some of the cars. So, for example, a car I'm very familiar with, the Mustang FR500S. It was my favorite car for a number of years. When you do pit stops in that car, you don't actually get, a high pressure kind of fuel inlet pump system or anything, crazy like that. It's actually separate fuel cans that get tossed into the car, and a lot of the lower end cars are like that on the service. I know the Miata, the MX-5s are very similar. They have a sort of situation like that. They don't fill very quickly. The tires don't change very fast. That's emulated, I think, generally in these cars as well. So in the likes of, say, the McLaren F1 car, the Williams F1 car, or the Indy car we have on the service, you can change a nose out pretty quick because it sort of duplicates a professional level pit crew. Here it's sort of, the repair time isn't nearly as fast, and I think it's a double-edged reason of not only does the car maybe not support the nose changes quickly, but the pit crews are going to be able to change it out as fast as well.
That is actually something that I didn't know either, so you learn something new every day, and that is, again, that's actually quite fascinating, so I'll have to keep an eye on that going forward as well. Looking back over to the number 7 car, Jean-Michael Nguyen. Right behind him, Donald Poole. This is your battle for 4th place now that's beginning to pick up as Poole tries to reel in that number 7 car coming around through turn 13.
Yeah, this is basically your closest fight on the racetrack, up near the head of the field between Jean-Michael Nguyen and Donald Poole. Fabio Berchtold was a part of this, but he's definitely dropped back quite a bit since then. So through the final corner, this duo is going to go, and we've not seen the slipstream really play a big part yet. Let's see if maybe it helps Donald Poole out a little bit more as we're right on board, and I think the answer to that question is going to be no. You can see how far ahead Mr. Jean-Michael Nguyen is as they work down in towards turn 1, and I honestly think what's happening, Nolan, is I think these guys have these cars so trimmed out that we're not seeing the huge slipstream down that front straightaway. Because, I mean, while there's so much of this track that you want the arrow, I think because this circuit is so wide and designed for F1 that even with minimal downforce, these cars are going so slow. I think they work kind of just fine around the circuit.
Yeah, so that seems to be, kind of the case. It is, of course, a very wide track, and in F1 cars, especially the modern-day F1 cars, it doesn't look wide. It looks actually, quite narrow, but when you throw these little star Mazdas on here, you really just see how wide it really is. You can honestly easily go 4 wide down the front straightaway if you're brave enough, and arguably if you're stupid enough, you could go 5 wide as well. But that could definitely be the reason why, these drivers are not able to make those big runs that we kind of were anticipating, because they've got the cars so trimmed out. And of course, with the pit stop cycling through, everybody's just so spread out around the entire track right now. It is difficult to get into the draft and keep close enough that you can really make any kind of maneuvers. So Poole, he's going to continue to try to reel him in. Still does have that draft, so this is still a fight to watch for sure.
Keeping some tabs on your race leader, there's still Angus Waddell, who leads by 3.4 seconds over Andre Cini. These cars, of course, still owing us pit stops here. And I'm not going to lie, I kind of like what these guys are doing, Nolan, a lot more compared to what we saw some of the early drivers, particularly Scott McIntyre with the pit strategy. I like running this fuel tank a little bit leaner and getting it actually down to sort of a lighter number earlier on. I think running this fuel tank dry, that'll get your car as much lighter as you can possibly get it. That's not only good for the tires, but it's just going to be good for your lap times as well. I don't really like the strategy of come down early and then top up. I just don't really see how it's going to work out, because you're going to have a heavier car for a longer period of time, and there's a risk that you get stuck in traffic, which Scott McIntyre has seemingly been able to avoid. Now, that said, we need to think about the deltas here. 27 seconds, currently the gap between Angus Waddell and Scott McIntyre, and we'll just sort of re-double check and refresh our minds what the delta number was like for Scott McIntyre. Is a 26.8 second trip down the pit road and an 8.4 second stop. But remember, we talked about this, that 26.8 is a little deceptive, because there's a huge stretch from where you can technically accelerate and where that timer technically stops, all the way down to more or less the blue cone when you essentially rejoin the racing line at turn 1, and you probably drop another 3 or 4 seconds just in that span of the racetrack as well, because you're about 100 miles an hour off of what everyone else is doing.
That is, very true, is that long front straightaway. You have to keep that into, you have to factor that in, as well as we look back down our very long front straightaway. As cresting down towards turn 1 is your race leader, Angus Waddell. Right behind him, Andreas Sini, continuing to try to work his way up and hopefully catch and fight him for the lead. But, I like the strategy as well, kind of run it till it's empty, because you never know. There might be the slimmest of chances that you might only have to stop with, just about 4 or 5 laps to go. Put like a couple extra laps of fuel in and get it out, but your car is still a lot lighter, meaning you can still run it a lot faster than those other drivers that are on a full tank of gas, but who are right now safe on fuel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there, as we are over half distance, of course, now in this event, and things were looking very, very tight at the head of the field early on. By the looks of things, once we have pit stop cycled through, it's still going to be a close fight between the likes of Angus Waddell and Scott McIntyre. Andre Sini has gotten dropped a little bit by Angus Waddell. If there's been some sort of strategy and fuel saving at play, that might equal out, but we're going to have to wait until after the pit stops to see. And a huge number of your cars up and down the field have really cycled through and kind of single filed out with one another. Pascal Filotto and Fabio Berchtold, though, by the way, they run 9th and 10th within a second of one another. That's basically the closest fight we have out on the racetrack.
So Fabio Berchtold he's going to continue to try to work his way back up through the field and pick up a couple more spots, as he took his pit stop down, I believe it was P5 when he took his stop, and he dropped a little further back, running 10th place now, so he is still set for a top 10 finish. He is going to see if he can try to work that up and pick up 9th, and ahead of these guys is, of course, Erwin Vandenberg in 8th place. So if Berchtold does have the speed, now would be the time to show it, get past Filotto, and then run down a few more spots in this field as well.
Problem is, I don't think he has that speed. Filotto's been quicker the last lap or two. And we'll bring up that lap gaps graphic just to sort of see the pace differential between these couple of drivers. And you can see Fabio Berchtold has been losing out, as actually our timing is, let's say, freaking out. Actually, no, I take that back. There's a pit stop in there, but you can see since the pit stop, Berchtold has he's lost about a second out there on a racetrack. So not great for Fabio here, but Pascal Filotto, I'm sure he's loving it.
So Pascal Filotto going to be loving it. We do have a developing story, though. Donald Poole looks like his race is just about done, as he's now down in the 10th place. What happened to him was coming through turn 13 on the last lap, overcooked the corner on his own, hit the sausage curbs, lost the car, went big into the tire barrier, and completely destroyed the suspension on that car. So P3 looks to be just about done, and that also helped to close in your battle for 6th place as well. And that was developing over the past couple of laps as well. And it's still developing big out on track.
Yeah, that it definitely is. Still a handful of cars that owe us pit stops, by the way. Right now we're looking at Jean-Michel Noyon, and it does not appear that he has made his scheduled pit stop, so currently sits in 3rd spot. Scott McIntyre is, I believe, the first car we have here, Nolan, that is actually pit and is out there in the head of the field, and he's currently the leading car of that group. He sits fourth. There's a couple cars that haven't pit that have cycled in behind him, but of course it's not a super long delta time here, but still at this point now it's just waiting for when Angus Waddell and Andre Cini are going to pit, and possibly because last time we were out here, we actually did have a situation in Interlagos. Last time we saw pit stops that Gabriel Perez won that race without making a pit stop. So this, of course, being the racetrack a quarter of a mile longer, as well as being a lap longer in distance is this race. I don't think you're going to be able to save that amount of fuel to not come down pit road, but maybe something to keep in the back of our heads, because me and Johnny said the same thing at Interlagos, and, well, then he ended up not coming down pit road anyways.
I kind of wonder if that's actually what Waddell is trying to do here. Maybe seeing, can I actually save enough to stretch it out and maybe win this race without having to make a pit stop? He, of course, was the pole sitter, so he's back up into first place, exactly where he wants to be. Whoa! Big bite of oversteer, though, coming through the hairpin, nearly losing the car, which would have definitely ended his shots at winning the race without having to make a stop. But, so Waddell, he could actually be taking Interlagos as inspiration here, kind of seeing, well, Perez won the race without having to make a pit stop. I wonder, maybe, can I do the same here today?
Definitely something to think about here, as these guys will work through, once again, 4.6 seconds the gap right now between Angus Waddell and Andre Cini. We just saw that big bite of oversteer. We'll see if that gap comes down whatsoever. It's seeming at the moment like the answer to that question is no. Even with that big bite of oversteer, it's still your race leading car of Angus Waddell opening up the margin. You can see the lap gaps, and Andre has been really struggling. You know, he was very competitive early on here, Nolan, but since things have kind of spread out, he's just not had the speed, and that gap, I mean, he sort of settled in at around 2 seconds and sat there for about 9-10 laps, it felt like, but the last 6, 7, 8 has just not been in favor of Andre Cini. He's lost a huge chunk of time the within that window.
Yeah, he lost 2/10 on lap 14, another half a second on lap 15, and then another 2 or 3 tenths on the last lap, lap 16 as well. So Andre Cini, definitely not having this race going quite his way, but it's going all in the way of Angus Waddell, who is continuing to just cycle around and put in laps. Cini, he got a little close to those sausage curves. I got a little nervous there for a second, because we have already seen just how effective sausage curves can be with these cars at unsettling them and completely ending their races. There's quite a few of them around Barcelona, so they are going to need to make sure that they try to more or less stay away from them as much as they can.
Yeah, sausage curves, of course, have been a huge topic in the in motorsports, especially for these sort of feeder formula cars. We saw the big incident at Monza, and of course, you wind back a couple of years, the big incident we saw at Macau, a car getting launched off the sausage curbs, and very, very relevant here. And actually, something else to think about here, Nolan, is this race clocks down. This track is going to be getting quicker and quicker, and we talked about fuel economy. With the cooler conditions, you're going to see that fuel economy go up just a little bit, because the car has so much more grip. You can be more and more aggressive with the throttle, and you can see it's really late in terms of just the time of day here. The sun pretty much nearly all the way down. These guys are going to be nearing darkness almost. There'll be plenty of sunlight. Don't worry about that. And of course, this circuit does have night lighting. We saw that from when it was released. Of course, the Week 13 24-hour race that was held in Spain, actually on location, that happened here. So there's no worries about that. But it's going to be a very cool surface and a very fast surface these guys have to work with in the final 5 or so laps.
So, as the temperature drops on the circuit, that could play in big to, the lap times dropping, and that could help out the fuel economy, like you mentioned, as well. So, all the factors right now are seeming to play right into the hands of that number 1 machine, who continues to try to put in circuits and continues to try to, clock away at the laps. Coming around, we're going to be 6 laps to go. We get 7 laps to go, when we get around to the start-finish line again. Still, though, that is a very, very long time in these Pro Mazdas.
Something happened as well, by the way, for Mr. Andre Cini. We've been talking about the fact that he's been losing pace. Last trip around the racetrack, Nolan, I'll bring the graphic up. He lost 3 seconds, nearly 2.5 seconds, last lap around the racetrack, did Andre Cini. Actually, did he pit? And I missed it.
I don't know. I'm going to see if I can track it out. He's very far back.
Yeah, he did
so
stop.
He actually,
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
So that's my apologies. I just thought he made it to start finish. So just open the way it looks on my screen is I just see a 7.5 second gap and a 141.3 lap. I didn't think that was the in lap. This is actually the first broadcast I think I've ever done around here at Catalunya, but he's actually come out not far behind Scott McIntyre. So that's sort of an idea of what the gap might be, and if that's the gap we're going to be expecting to see, Scott, after the pit stop sequence, I think is likely going to end up about a second or so back off the likes of Angus Waddell after the pit stop sequence, just judging where Mr. Andre Cini came out relative to him out there on the racetrack. Now that said, we do know Cini was not having the sort of speed that Waddell was, so maybe a little bit of fuel save from Cini helped him on pit road, but I think we're likely going to see this number 2 of Scott McIntyre cycle in a second.
Yes, and of course, Angus Waddell, I think it's all but obvious to him now that he probably won't be able to make it on fuel as well, as he's just running through the final sector now of the track. Will he come down as we cross over onto lap number 20? Will he come down this time, or will he try to stay out and hold him off as long as he can? Of course, he might start to gradually lose time. He is going to be coming down this time, so this will be very interesting here to see if Scott McIntyre can put himself back up into the lead.
Let's refresh our memories once again, shall we? It was an 8.4 second stop and a 26.8 second delta time for Scott McIntyre. 8.6 and 26.9 for Andre Cini. What can Angus Waddell manage, as it seems like no one's going to be able to make it on fuel? Jean-Michel Nouillon might still owe us a pit stop, but how long is this man going to be sat on pit road? 5, 6, 7, 8 should be getting released any second now. This is a long stop from Angus Waddell.
Oh,
he
no.
may not have managed that well. 29.8 is what the gap time was, and here comes Scott McIntyre on Angus Waddell. Where is he? Trying to find a camera shot that has them both. But even with the long pit stop here, Nolan, he still has the race lead comfortably. Does Angus Waddell? The gap right now between him and Scott McIntyre, 2.3 seconds. Waddell had an enormous margin.
Well, that's definitely a longer margin than we expected him to have, to say the very least, as that has promoted Jean-Michel Nouillon up into the lead. But I do not believe that Nouillon has pitted yet, so he still owes us one stop as well. The question is, will Waddell catch him before he makes that stop? And if he does, then that therefore means Waddell could be backed up into Scott McIntyre's draft. So this could still get interesting here into the final laps of this race.
We're not expecting it, but if there's any way Jean-Michel Nouillon could pull out an upset victory and maybe save the fuel, it would be a fantastic one to watch. It'll be 5 laps to go next time they get to start finish, but right now that's going to be the only fight we have really. P3 and P4, which as they currently run, is somewhat close between McIntyre and Cini, but this is going to be the fight, I think. P1, P2. Waddell definitely has the speed over Jean-Michel Nouillon, even if Nouillon can somehow stretch this to the end of the race, Nolan.
I don't think he's going to be able to. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I just don't see it as being able to. And in fact, there he goes down into the pits, and that will allow Angus Waddell into the lead. I think that stop, despite being longer, I think Waddell might have just won this race.
Yeah, I think you're right. He definitely has the gap he would have liked. We're right on board with Andre Cini, who we've seen him struggle with the pace a little bit. You see the sun starting to come back out. Not fully following the slipstream of Scott McIntyre here, Nolan, and not really a fan of that. He sort of pulls over to the left-hand side of the racetrack early while McIntyre was in the middle. I think he needs to be a lot more aggressive with the slipstream at this point in the event.
I agree. So it could be Cini kind of just trying to play his cards right, maybe just pressure McIntyre for a little bit, be patient, trying to force him into a mistake. But right now, McIntyre still has a very comfortable gap ahead of Cini. So at the moment, the way it sits, McIntyre could still pull away with the easy win. You see through that little king, Cini did take a bit of a tighter line, but it's negligible in terms of the difference it makes in that type of a line. So he's really going to have to be, like you said, a lot more aggressive and try to follow McIntyre around more aggressively in that draft if he's going to have a hope of getting back up to second place.
So let's see what these drivers are going to be able to work with here. Cini is trying to stay with Scott McIntyre as they work through the sort of end part of the final sector, what would be Sector 3 for the F1 circuit. through turn 13 at your up car. Big curb on the inside. You can have a lot of fun smacking these curbs in the touring cars, and these little sort of formula cars, you're not going to be nearly as aggressive. Let's see what the gaps are among P1, P2, and P3. The 1.9 second margin at the start of the last lap. This time they'll come across start finish, and Angus Waddell opens that gap up by 2/10. 2 seconds is now separating P1 and P2 with 4 laps left to go in this race, and Andre Cini is only 0.8 of a second off the margin to get to Scott McIntyre. So Cini's there, and he can definitely sense that second position here, Nolan, but does he have enough? He's just not seemed like he's had the speed. Maybe he has a little bit of damage on that race car. I don't know what it is, but that 3 just seems to have sort of stalled out a little bit.
It still doesn't look to me like he does have the pace, even down the front straightaway. You could just tell that he was a little further off the back end than he was on the last lap. So I just do not believe that Cini has the pace that he needs in order to really get the pace he needs to run down Scott McIntyre. I think he's got to hope that the top 2 makes some kind of mistake, but the way those 2 have been putting in laps so incredibly consistently, I really don't see it happening.
So Cini has to find somehow, some way. Not really too many other close fights up and down the racetrack. 1 second is this margin between Pascal Filotto and Fabio Berchtold, but they seem to have themselves in a similar situation, whereas Fabio just seems to not have the speed here, Nolan, to reel him in. We've seen this group kind of stay stagnated. There was one point when they were close. Pascal has since opened up that gap, though, but they seem to have Fabio has sort of evened the pace out at a 1 second gap. He's not losing as much time anymore as he was earlier, but he's definitely not reeling in Pascal Filotto really either.
And Andrea Cini just ran a little bit wide off the corner, lost even more time, but, of course, looking back down through the grid, it is, Berchtold certainly has lost the time on Pascal Filotto, and at this point in time, I am beginning to think that this is kind of the way things are going to sit. All the pit stops have, of course, been made at this point, so with nobody really close around the field to each other, with the exception of, having our 2 cars kind of in the middle of the field and the occasional lapper, this field looks pretty much set to finish in this order, another 2 laps from now.
So let's see, we'll transfer back over this fight between P2 and P3. Lap comparison gap coming up, and you're going to see here margins just not shifting in favor of Andre Cini. Andre did have a good lap a few laps ago here, Nolan, where he brought down the margin to Scott McIntyre by nearly half a second, but since then, he's since lost 0.9 of a second on the following 2 laps. So for Andre Cini, it's not just a speed thing, it seems to be a consistency thing as well, of him just not having that mark. That said, the gap at the start of this lap was 1.5 seconds. The gap now live is 1.2, now 1.1. So maybe McIntyre struggling a little bit here in the final couple of laps, as we're going to have 2 to go at the line.
Well, in order to be fast, you need to be consistent. You can always put in that 1 golden lap, that 1 fast lap, but if you can't follow it up with, laps that are only about a 10th or so off of that, you're just not going to get anywhere. And I think that's kind of, a perfect example of what we are beginning to see here, as it did bring the gap down by another 4/10, but it's still not going to be enough, as you can see from the gaps, just nowhere really close to overtaking them just yet into turn 1.
Yep, so inside of 2 laps to go now. As you see that margin, it did come down a little bit. We'll bring the lap gap up. We'll see if it's updated on our graphic. And the answer to that question is no. Trust me, Andre Cini was not 0.6 of a second off the pace of Scott McIntyre last trip around the racetrack. I think I heard a little bit of tire scrubbing for McIntyre through turn 4 that time, maybe fighting with the oversteer. And if you're that number 2 machine, this is not the situation you want to be fighting with grip. Seems like you pushed a little bit wide there off of turn 5 in towards 6 and 7. Let's see what the Deuce can do this time through. Nicely turns it in through turn 7, through turn 8. The car looks like it's working a little bit better now in towards turn 9, but seemed like the first half of this lap or so and into the last lap, Nolan, he was really struggling with this car with Scott McIntyre, as we now approach and get ready for the white flag off of when we get to the final corner. Actually gap now within a second.
Well, the first sector does have all of the fast corners. The second sector is, much more flat out. It's a lot more high speed. The third sector is where all of the slower corners really are. So that's where we could be seeing McIntyre struggling with the tire life, is in the first, half of the lap, where all of the very fast corners and little kinks are. Now the question is that enough for Cini to try to run him down? He will have to gain about 8/10 of this lap. McIntyre goes big on the defensive, and this time Cini follows aggressively in the draft.
He needs the slipstream. This is going to be the final time down to what is easily the best passing opportunity on the racetrack. Half a second was the gap at the line as they get ready to hit the brakes and turn into turn one. It comes down to just over 4/10. Now pushing out to 5 as they work off of turn 2 and in towards turn 3 for the final time. Angus Waddell leads this race still. 3.5 seconds up the road, but they scream up the hill in towards turn 4. You can see how far that gap has come down. I think Scott McIntyre may have slightly underfilled that race car and is having issues with fuel through turn 4 and in towards turn 5. Is there any way for Cini to be able to make a late race last lap move to get himself back up into second? The margin remains somewhat stable as they turn into turn 7 through turn number 8. Not really bringing the gap down that first half of the lap, but as Nolan just said, the second half of the lap is where things really slow up, and this is where Cini seems to be really, really good. On the brakes now, coming up towards the braking zone at turn 10, the last hard braking zone on the lap, and the move is not going to happen here. So is there any opportunity left here for Cini? There's a final and iconic pass in the motorbikes here at this track about 5 years ago, but I don't think it's going to happen for the number 3 of Andre Cini this time. Through turn 14, through turn 15, they will come, and they nearly make contact between the 2 and the 3. Angus Waddell will win this race, but around the outside, did I speak too soon? Andre Cini's going to try to set it up, and the 2 is out of gas. Andre Cini, I believe, and he has taken second place.
Are you kidding me? Scott McIntyre just ran out. He runs out of fuel coming off of the final corner. That is, I haven't seen something like that in a very long time. Replay coming up on your screens. That, I think, right there, Andre Cini must have made his prayer to the racing gods, and it must have worked, because my goodness, that got really intense. You're going to see here on board, nearly drives through the back of him and then makes the pass around the outside of the final corner. When is the last time you've seen a finish like that?
What a run that was there from Andre Cini. You see how easily he was able to get around McIntyre after setting it up around the outside. Well, right on board with McIntyre now. Same replay, same bit of racetrack. And we'll see exactly. You'll listen to the revs and hear the car struggle. He's already struggling for fuel as he turned into the chicane. If you listen closely, you can hear it cough, 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 cough. And coming off the final corner, keep an eye on the left hand of your screen, and you see Andre Cini just breeze on by as they work down towards start finish. That's heartbreak for Scott McIntyre there in the closing moments. That's a bit of Rossi versus Lorenzo from what we saw in MotoGP. I think it was a better part of 5 or 6 years ago now at this point, at this same exact racetrack. Here, Nolan came down to the final sequence of corners, but of course, we haven't pointed at the cameras at this man yet since the finish, but this man is your winner, Angus Waddell, but the story was for P2.
Well, that just shows that even when you think you don't have a chance, you got to just keep the throttle in and then go as hard as you can, because like they always say, it is not over until it's over, and sometimes you need just that little bit extra of a push. And I can tell you right now, if Cini had backed off and just tried to settle for third, he would not have been close enough to make that move done. That was hard work and determination trying to run him down. It paid off perfectly for him today.
So with that, let's go down your post-race results from the Pro Mazda Championship here at Catalunya. Race winner today. It was an eventful one. He started on the pole position, but at the end of the first lap, he found himself 4th, and after 25 laps of running, after actually about 12, he managed to get his way back into the race lead, and he led from there. Andre Cini, what a run for him. He was caught up behind Scott McIntyre. Scott had issues with fuel, and it was a last lap, last corner pass as Scott McIntyre ran out of fuel that Andre Cini was able to just steal second place away. Gabriel Perez comes home in 4th with Erwin Vandenberg rounding out your top 5. Pascal Filotto is going to sit in the 6th position with Fabio Berchtold in 7th. John Michael Nuillon 8th, Troy Needlinger in 9th, and Carlos Medina will round out your top 10. Paul Noper in the 11th spot, Luis Canel in 12th, Donald Poole in 13th, Ollie Peacock in 14th. We're getting into cars now, by the way, that had big problems over the course of this race. John Young in the 15th position, Ann Medema in 16th, Jens Wendler and Dave Candy. And I know there's some talks amongst us, Nolan, with this being a this being a really interesting race. First time, I think, at least that I can think. I don't think it is the first time that we've broadcasted this racetrack. I believe we've had possibly a Friday primetime race or something else happen here in Catalunya. But it was the first time for me, and it was the first time for these Pro Mazda cars. And anytime you bring these feeder series cars to one of these big GP tracks, it's always interesting. We were expecting slipstream and a bit of wind tunnel testing, though, being the big test, not the fight on pit road that we saw today, and the issues with fuel and strategy.
Well, sometimes big GP tracks can shake things up like that. You know, you come here with an expectation for one thing, and you'll get the complete opposite. And that's what the case of today's race certainly was. And still made it. It was still very interesting to watch, you know, with all the pit strategies going on. But Angus Bell, he played his strategy perfectly clearly, even with that long stop. Still came through to take the win. Such a shame, though, for Scott McIntyre that he just had to watch Andre Assini go by for that little bit. Didn't leave the fuel hose in that car for about another 0.2 of a second.
Yep, and as we get ready, we'll move on. I'll bring the graphic up. You won't see this on our production feed, Nolan, so don't worry. But our final broadcast of the iRacing season is coming up for this championship. We head to Phillip Island next week, and it's a very different racetrack, Phillip Island. You know, we've actually kind of had a great batch of racetracks for broadcasting of this series. We started out with Laguna Seca, skipped a couple weeks, went to Brands Hatch for week 3, skipped a couple weeks, went to Interlagos for week 5. Then we had a bit of a month-long hiatus, and it's going to be Zandvoort, Barcelona, and then Phillip Island next week, 3 in a row on the trot. So broadcasting half the championship, I think we kind of hit sort of all the different types of racetracks perfectly, and Phillip Island is going to be a very fun one, I think, to cap off that series.
Phillip Island is always a track where you can always see some of the best racing, and I would expect nothing less from the Pro Mazdas going there. Again, it is like this track. It is very high speed, lots of high-speed corners. Then you, of course, have got some of the very famous, diving down hairpins where we've seen some incredible moments, even in other past series, like the iRacing World Championship Grand Prix series last year, where Gregor Houtu was taken out by, Mitchell de Jong with just 4 laps to go at that racetrack. So it's, of course, a beautiful place. Can't wait to see these Pro Mazdas there as well.
It's going to be fantastic to watch them do battle for 20 laps around that speedway, but that is going to do it for us here today on RaceSpotTV. Be sure to join us next week for that. We have to thank everyone, of course, who makes this broadcast possible. Huge shout-outs to the iRacing.com for the camera work. Nolan Rempel, my co-commentator today, and I've been Randy Chinnis, bringing you both audio coverage as well as all the video coverage as well. We hope to see you next week, not only for the Pro Mazda Championship, but it's a big week next week. We have the Winter Derby, we have the finale of the iRacing Thrustmaster Rallycross World Championship Series at Atlanta Short, and then we have another presentation of PCDC as well as Team Brit. That's going to be a fantastic event as well. Be sure to tune in for all of that and more next week on RaceSpotTV and the iRacing Esports Network. But until all that, and until then, we will see you next time. Bye-bye.